Okay, now that we finally have all of our brushes set up and we've got hotkeys set up, let's go ahead and start taking a look at what these different brushes do. So we've already had an extensive session with the standard brush. Let's take a look at another brush, the Damian Standard brush. And again, with all your brushes, you can go ahead and tap B and just open up this, and then you can go tap D. And just for any of the brushes, you tap like just what I've shown you there. Tap B first, open up the brush menu. If you know you got something that starts with a C, you can type C. Or I know this one's going to be D, and look for Damian Standard. And you see when you get here, this is the hotkey for it after you get to this level, S or 1 or I, like this one. So I can just type S, and then now I'm on Damian Standard. So that's how you can get to any of the different type of brushes. Brush size, tap S, we can drag left and right. Actually, they made it to where you can hold down S now and click and drag, and you can tap U for the intensity of the brush. Now Damian Standard is a pretty cool brush where if I want to do some really fine kind of wrinkles and things like that, I can make my brush size a little bit smaller like this, and I can do detail passes like this, right? I can also hold down Alt and then click and drag out to make a positive shape for this. And the cool thing about this brush is that, at least I think, is it's got this kind of shape to it. So if I make it a little bit larger, a lot larger actually, and I click and drag on there, you can see that it does this kind of pinching thing and pulls in. And if I hold down Alt, I can click and drag up like this, and you can see how it builds up based off of this alpha that we've got here. Now, as you get the brush really large like this, lazy mouse is something that starts to affect things. So I'm just going to double click here, go to stroke, and I'm going to click and drag this over here. So I'm going to just dock it right there. And if you go to lazy mouse is this thing that's basically got this. If I click up the radius on here, you can kind of see what's going on here. It's this kind of line that follows your brush, and you can do these really kind of cool, really kind of sweeping kind of lines. Now, as cool as this is, you can see as the brush size gets really, really large, we've got this kind of like step patterns, like step, 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 right? What we can do to fix that is we've got this lazy step, and we can drag this down, and we can put this really close to 0, something like that. And then those steps get closer and closer together. Now, the problem is they build up on top of each other, so it makes the brush feel really, really strong. So you'll have to tap U or go up to the Z intensity up here, and you'll have to drop this down. I'll drop it down to something like this. Let's try 14, and even that's pretty cool. If I hold down Alt and then click and drag up like this, I get a nice kind of really I think it's a nice looking line that kind of builds up for this. So I can kind of click and drag out like this, and you can see I can make some really cool kind of hard edge looking kind of things. And that's if the brush is really large. And I can also carve in and follow some of this stuff. Now this is if you want this to feel like this very man-made kind of handmade kind of thing. Now if you want to turn lazy mouse on and off, it's real simple. Just tap L and turn that on or off. I do like to see all those controls with the brush, so you know, as we continue on, you could build maybe a little bit more to your interface that you have here. So I'm going to hold down Control and Alt and click and drag out lazy mouse, and maybe the lazy step, maybe lazy radius, and lazy smooth, like that. And after that, then just take this off just like we did before, and then you could say store config. You could do that, and they can also save the UI as you sit there and build more of your UI. You've got more options for that. So again, you can use turn L to turn lazy mouse on and off for that. Now, the other thing is I've actually got this this model, and I'm using the Dynamesh sphere, and I think we talked about you know, loading that up as a project and hitting the this light box and opening that thing up, and then kind of getting to that through these projects on there. And then we've got this Dynamesh 128, and that's the highest resolution. But if you find yourself starting to need more resolution to this, we can go to geometry, we can go to Dynamesh, and we can up that resolution a little bit, and we can always hold down control and then click and then remesh, and you can kind of see the results of what we got going on here. So maybe I'll just smooth back some of the results just a little bit, as you see here, and you can see what I did with the Damian Standard kind of brush there. Okay, the next brush we can just kind of move down and say clay tubes like this, and this one does this really nice kind of striation kind of look to things. This does work rather well for muscle structures, things like that, but it also works well for just kind of building up a surface, and then if you hold down shift and just kind of smooth that back, I think it works rather well for that too. So the other thing that you might notice as I lay this down and it builds up this kind of natural edge at the ends, if I just kind of smooth some of this stuff back, I can still kind of keep some of that hard edge that where it kind of meets like this, and I think that looks pretty good. And I'll just go ahead and remesh. I'll hold down control and drag and then just remesh that part right there like that. And then I'll go back to this Damian Standard. That way I can hold down Alt and I can do a positive version on that, and I can kind of lift that lid up a little bit more like that. So I think that's pretty cool with what's going on there with that and what we're kind of doing here. And then again, we can also use this to do some finer kind of wrinkles, things like that. I'm just gonna smooth out some of the results on this thing just like that. And then the next one that we'll move down on the list here is the move brush. So with the move brush, I can tap 4 for my hotkey that we set up, or we can just click here. And then this one is really nice for if you've got the brush really small, you could move out the surface. You could do smaller things like this if you wanted. I hardly ever use the move brush for something like this, but it is possible. I just want to show you, depending on the size of this, what we're going to have going on with this. Now, if you make the brush size a bit larger, you can do some proportional changes to things. So you could really kind of take this and make it feel like it's this kind of virtual clay, and maybe I wanted to do something with the nose, kind of like that. I can pull this out like this. And again, depending on the size of this, if I wanted to do really large changes to this thing and really kind of change the overall proportional structure of something, depending on the size of this, you can grab quite a bit of clay or digital clay, or you can grab just a little bit. So it's really up to you, right? Depending on that size, what you kind of got going on. And I kind of like this feeling like a little bit more like a frown like that on there. And I'll go back to Damian Standard, and you can see, like, after you remesh, sometimes some of this gets a little soft, and maybe you want to kind of like work details in just a little bit more and something like that. And so I'll continue on, and we'll go to this HPolish. So HPolish, this one has a polish feature, but it kind of recognizes an edge, and you can see if I push on this side like this and I go to the top and I push, it kind of preserves this edge right here and makes that nice and hard for a hard edge. And then I'll just hold down shift and kind of smooth out the results of this a little better, kind of like that, just like you see here. Right there like that. And I'll kind of smooth this and through here. Actually, sorry, not smooth. I'm just using that HPolish brush as we go along here. Now again, if it's going to hit something that feels almost like an edge, it's going to kind of start to try to preserve that, and together with that, with smoothing, we can get pretty nice, decent results like there. I'm going to push just a little bit more up on that so you can get a nice kind of hard edge on that thing, just like you see there. Now polish, that one is just going to try to polish the surface, and you can kind of rub this in a circular kind of motion. I'm trying to really see an area that maybe I'd want to kind of push down and kind of polish up. So to be honest, I really don't use this brush tons. I've seen other people kind of use this brush, and we can tighten up even those corners on this like this. I think I had to make the brush size a little bit smaller for this to work the way that I was expecting it to kind of work. So I can kind of maybe flatten and kind of push down on this a little bit right in through here, and then maybe smooth that out. And you can see how that kind of changes the forms of this a little. Let me make the brush size even smaller. I'm undoing some of that stuff if I just didn't like the way that it was kind of coming out. So we got that, just like that, and I'll push up on here, maybe smooth out the results just a little. Right there like that. Okay, we'll go to the next one, Inflate, and this one is pretty cool, where it does basically like what it sounds like. If I wanted to make my brush pretty large, and then imagine I put like an air bubble in this thing and just kind of blow this thing up. Now it really tears up the geometry. If I turn on the poly frame, you can see how it takes the polygons, it makes them run into each other. Normally that would not be a very good thing, but we do have Dynamesh, and we're using that. So if we remesh, you can see it's gonna kind of just blend all that stuff together, and we can kind of smooth out the results just a little bit. And so that's kind of cool, you know, how that works. If we didn't have Dynamesh, and before Dynamesh, this you'd have to be really careful with how you use this tool. Now the other thing is that you can see I've got this wrinkle here next to this wrinkle, and if I use the Inflate, I can get this really nice kind of creasing to kind of happen if I just kind of run this along through here like this, and it feels like a much more natural kind of crease that might be happening. I can do the same thing for the lips, kind of like that. And then we could just remesh, and you can see that it's going to kind of build that edge. Now what I do see is the amount of detail that I'm trying to get with this thing. You can see this edge is nice and crisp, and then when we remesh, I just don't have enough resolution, so I can tell that I'm at a point where I need to kind of crank this up a little bit more, and then remesh, and then kind of see the results, see how that holds a lot better. It feels like I still need just a little bit more, and I'll remesh and try to get some better results. So there we go, remeshed, held the line, looks about just like what it looked like before. Now I can kind of maybe come through and smooth out the results of this just a little bit and through here to get rid of some of that leftover polygon look, because it's trying to, you know, basically up the resolution and still keep what I had before. So there wasn't enough polys there, and it kind of had this faceted kind of looking through there. The only thing you can kind of do is go through and maybe soften that up, and then if you soften certain details up too much, then you'd want to come through and just crispen this stuff up like this. So maybe I'll do this with the lips. Maybe I'll hold down Alt and then kind of drag that out, drag the surface up, something like that. Dig into this just like that, and then I'll use the Move brush, and I can make it really small. We can do some smaller kind of moves just like this. And I can maybe fix some of the curvature of some of this stuff if it doesn't feel quite right. Kind of like this, and then kind of think it'd be kind of cool just to drag this out like this. So you can see as we kind of move down through here, we're kind of just keep moving back and using some of these different brushes. The next one I'll show you is this layer brush here, and this one just builds up. depending on the intensity that you have, it's going to build up a certain height on the surface. Now if I click and I drag, everything's good and everything builds up to the same height. Problem is, if I use this brush and I make a certain layer height like this, and then I go back over it again, then it builds up on top of it. You may or may not want that functionality. You may want to just continuously build up to a certain height and only that height. This seems a little odd, but this is what you can do to fix that. You can go to the tool area, you can go to the morph target area, you can store a morph target, and then once you do that, now with the layer brush, if we click and drag out and push as hard as we can build up some layers like this, and then we can continue to push and it'll build up to that same height. Don't ask me how that changes the algorithm, but it just does, and they've built in that functionality, and I think it's pretty cool that it's in there. So you might have something like that, which to me that feels like just kind of a weird design. So then maybe I'll go ahead and just do some design elements kind of like this. There we go. I'll just do something like that for the layer brush. Okay. Now the morph brush. This one's kind of interesting, where just like we stored a morph target for this, just to store that height information, if we store a morph target, we're basically holding everything about this model, the position of the model and what it looks like, into some kind of memory, right? Now if we took this and we moved this, and let's say we do some crazy proportional changes to this, we'll do something like that, and like this. What you can do after you've got this set up, let's just say these are my changes that I'm making here. In the morph area, you can say switch, and we can switch between those two different states that we have. You can also do a slider, so you can get some kind of in-between of that, and I'll hit undo for that. Now with the morph brush, what you can do is with a brush, you can actually brush back to whatever that original state was. So you can see I can kind of do this here like that, and I can kind of push that area back in, and this is all brush base again. With the intensity, I can tap U and drop this down really low, and maybe try to get something that's a bit smoother transition or something. So that might feel a bit odd. I'm going to hit the Control-Shift-Z to do redo. And again, maybe you just want to brush in a particular area and store, you know, some part of what that model looked like before you did this this change. So there's different possibilities for what you can do with that. I'll just go ahead and hit switch and then go back for that. So sometimes I just use this if there's an operation where maybe I gotta project something onto something else. I might store a morph target first, and then if there's like problems with projections, then I can just use a brush and kind of, you know, push things back to that. So that's why I do project stuff quite a bit, and that's why this is on here, but it doesn't seem like a super obvious brush for like what you would use at the very beginning whenever you start, you know, just kind of doing some concept sculpting. Last one that I've got here on the list is this trim dynamic. This one's really nice for doing these flattening effects, and you can do like really large shapes. You can see how your brush cursor kind of surfs along the edge of, or the surface of whatever you're kind of hovering your cursor around. Depending on that angle, you can click and push down, and you can build up a big flat surface like that. So that's a possibility for you to do that, right? Or you can do something really small, like you see that there's this edge that's been built up along here, and it looks like kind of a bevel. That's just by running that trim dynamic along this edge, kind of pushing this down enough to where it kind of feels like a bevel. Now sometimes people use this for doing maybe stone and things like that, where it can feel like if you push this down like this, it feels like it's been, maybe that edge has been chipped and worn down. So you can get a nice, really kind of cool look with that. And you can kind of just keep pushing down and through there. Now that together with Damian Standard and kind of pulling in through here, like with some cracks, let's just build just a little bit of cracking through here like that, and then we'll go to trim dynamic, make the brush size really small, and then run right in through here kind of like this. I don't want to push too hard, I just want to kind of hit some of these edges just a bit and highlight the fact that there's this kind of cracking going on. Kind of like that. And so you can see how we get that kind of effect kind of going for that. Again, I just wanted to show that for demonstration purposes. This is where I think this undo feature becomes really kind of handy, because we can try some things out, and if you don't like it, we can just go back and turn that off. So maybe we got some other things where we're doing and finishing off some of this design that's on here. So then we've got this very strange kind of maybe carved head. Like this. Just gonna come down and through here. Now one thing I don't think I told you about the lazy mouse is there is a lazy snap, and if you pull that up, it tries to build off the end of the mark that you see here, and it continues it to go down. So that's a nice, really nice feature, especially if you're using lazy mouse and you don't want to get this kind of broken line. Like say I stop there and I want to continue that just to move the model. Now I can kind of continue that and continue this on. Just like that. And there you go. And I can hold down Alt and drag out. Just like that. So a lot of really cool features in here. Again, for what I do, I don't really need tons and tons of brushes. These are probably the ones that I use the most. You got a lot of brushes at your disposal, and you know you'll find special cases for certain things that you do, but for the most part, I think you can do quite a bit with just these few brushes that you see here. You can even do stuff like what I'm doing here, where I can make a negative and then a positive, and then we can really make something that feels like it's kind of more like a man-made surface, you know, hard edge. And you could use that HPolish along the edge if you wanted to kind of flatten that down a bit and build up that edge. So you got a lot of possibilities here. I'm just kind of smoothing out the results. You could use that polish to try to do this in a circular kind of motion, kind of flatten that surface down, kind of polish it up, then maybe smooth and go over the top of it. And again, I can go back to my move brush if I wanted to do some proportional kind of changes. Like this, let it do its autosave, and maybe pull out this a little bit more, right through there. And I'm just going to make this a little more pointed. Just like that. So I think that's looking pretty cool. Might want to drag this out just a little bit more. The other thing is, you know, as you sculpt, just continue to kind of work around your model and see about the proportions. And as you continue to work around your model, you might start to see something that you just maybe instinctually kind of like see that needs to be fixed. You know, you look at faces and heads all day long, so anything that feels just really odd to you, you're probably going to pick that up and then start to tweak on it. Just like this, I didn't realize that this shape of the eye should probably be something more like this. I think that's starting to look pretty cool. Do something like that. Okay, so that's quick rundown of all the different brushes and a little bit of a demonstration for you to kind of see how I might use those different brushes to sculpt out some of the surfaces and some of the shapes. And really, you're just going to have to kind of experiment with these brushes yourself. You're going to have to discover what you like, what you kind of react to. You're going to have to discover what is the pressure sensitivity of each brush and the size of the brush that you're using, and how does that affect the way that you're using the tools, and is it giving you the kind of look that you're kind of going for? Is it finishing out the model the way that you're kind of anticipating or you're hoping for? Okay.